Well, when I first got to Arundel, I hadn't been here all that very long, I found that the museum was a very attractive place to go and visit. Then I got dragged into their committee, but I was more interested in the Arundel itself, and I started looking at some of the old buildings and researching into it, their history and their origins. And I discovered that there were over 30 old pubs here, of which only 7 now sell beer. Although some of the old buildings were very interesting, I thought that looking at the old pubs was more interesting. It would be a stimulus would of course be all the men who used to drink in them, because they used to go from pub to pub. For example, in Tarrant Street, we've identified 7 pubs. Well, there's only about 4 left. And it's that sort of thing where we can find out what the pubs were like, what they smelt like, what they were like inside, and people, if they've got old records, any old photographs, that's important, which we can't get. Arundel is a pretty ancient place. It's Roman, pre-Roman, Saxon in fact. And when the Romans came, they discovered, of course, that it was a very warm country. Sussex was quite warm, and they brought in with the idea of wine from Rome, and vineyards have erupted. And then, of course, the word taberna, which is Roman, was really the taverns, the beginning of the taverns, where wine could be retailed. And that was the beginning, of course, of the Vintners Wine Company, where I mean, this is the old Vintner Company of London. And then, of course, Arundel emerged as a port, and that brought in sailors, because Arundel water wasn't really safe to drink in many times. But of course, the products of breweries is safe to drink, because they boil it for an hour and a half anyway, the water. And that's how the pub started. And there were 2 sorts. There were ale houses and beer houses. Now, the beer houses were for consumption on the premises, ale houses for consumption on and off. And they were emerging about 30 or more old beer houses and old ale houses. That's the sort of thing that we want people to be stimulated by. Write in, talk about it, bring in records, let the museum capitalise from all this.
Now we're standing in front of the King's Arms. Now this is one of the pubs that you know a little bit about.
Well, it was reputed to be started in 1625. It may have started earlier. We haven't much of a history about it, but it's certainly the oldest one now in Arundel. And we think too that with the Queen's Arms next to it, which is now a private house, it's a good starting point to get people sort of excited by look at some of our old pubs. We're now in River Road, and this, in fact, is the site of the old Jolly Sailors. Although this is now called River Road, it was the original shipyard, where we had quays and shipbuilding going along the river. And this, of course, is where the sailors came for their beer, and dare I say it, for their women. That sticking out from the wall was the old pub sign of the Heart in Hand, which I think closed in the early 60s. But we need some information about that too. People used to drink there, so we need people to come forward and tell us about it. We're now back in the High Street of Arundel, and this building here was in fact the site of the Old George Inn, going back to 1571. And it was the centre for one of the political parties in opposition to another one, which used to, in fact, meet down at the Crown, which we'll show you in a minute, down the road.
And when did this pub close?
I think probably in the 1800s. I don't think it got into the 1900s at all. So it was probably only functioning perhaps for 100 years.
And are there any signs that would sort of tell us that it used to be a pub?
Only that it's an old Georgian building, but there's nothing else. This building here is another old one. It's the Crown, going back to about the same time as the George. And although it's now got a Victorian facade, the original wall of the George is behind. In fact, down here you'll see some of what it used to be. Now this here is part of the old crown, and inside there is a lovely brick wall, 16th century brick wall with timbers. It's pretty ancient. This part here is where they used to load the casks, because there's a cellar down there. Pretty deep it is. Well, we're now back at the museum itself, and it's the museum itself that needs your help in collecting, getting data together. So anyone who wants to make contributions, stories about themselves, old ghost stories even, we're looking for ghost stories always, get in touch with the museum.